DW World in Progress with Sarah Stephan.
It's been called the biggest forgotten conflict of our time. A humanitarian catastrophe is unfolding in Sudan.
By December, there is no more assistance. We have no more. We really need an urgent funding for this crisis.
The situation in Sudan couldn't be worse. It pains me that the world has overlooked one of the largest humanitarian catastrophe of our generation. I have been on Ukraine and lately on Gaza for good reasons. But how come the world hasn't understood that 6 million people were forced out of their homes in 7 months?
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Sarah Stephan. Fighting has driven 6 million people from their homes in Sudan in recent months. In the Darfur region, the violence is reportedly escalating, with some warning of ethnic cleansing. The UN World Food Programme has said it will have to slash aid for Sudanese refugees in Chad starting in December because it can't raise enough funds. Jennifer Collins has more with this report by Anna Ozios.
The wind sweeps across the barren landscape in Chad's east, swirling up desert sand and tugging at the tarpaulins. Women in colourful robes cook on an open fire in front of refugee tents. A tiny baby blinks in the bright sunlight. Pictures from the Reuters news agency show those who have made it out of Sudan's Darfur region. These families have fled across the border to Chad to escape deepening violence there. They are alive, but they have nothing. A young mother called Iqbal explains.
My husband and I have 4 children. Life is really tough. We get a 10-kilogram sack of food a month, but that's not enough. It's simply not enough food.
The need in the refugee camps is huge, but international aid organisations don't have enough funding to ease the humanitarian catastrophe. Chad alone is home to at least 800,000 refugees from Sudan, says Pierre Honorat from the UN World Food Programme.
By December, there is no more assistance. We have no more. So we really need an urgent funding for this crisis. It's urgent because we need time to purchase the food, to bring the food on the site, to bring the food at the border, and to make sure the people will get at least a meal a day.
The troops of the 2 most powerful men in Sudan have been clashing for more than 6 months. On one side is the army general and de facto ruler of the country, Abdel Fattah Burhan, and on the other is his former deputy, militia leader Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo. Also known as Hemeti, he commands the Rapid Support Forces. Fighting is taking place all over the country, often in the middle of residential areas. Secretary-General of the Norwegian Refugee Council, Jan Egeland, says the situation is dire.
The situation in Sudan couldn't be worse. It pains me that the world has overlooked one of the largest humanitarian catastrophe of our generation. I have been on Ukraine and lately on Gaza for good reasons. But how come the world hasn't understood that 6 million people were forced out of their homes in 7 months?
The situation is worst in Darfur, in Sudan's west. Militia leaders, particularly those in the Rapid Support Forces, are accused of carrying out brutal human rights atrocities. Echoing the 2003 ethnic cleansing in Darfur, says Egeland.
And we're now doing also work in Darfur, where a tremendous ethnic cleansing campaign is taking place. I remember when I was in the United Nations, I led the work on Darfur, which was President Bush of the United States and Prime Minister Blair of the United Kingdom were captivated with helping Darfur. Now the same thing is happening in Darfur as in 2003-04, and nobody seems to notice.
There's no end in sight to the crisis. International mediation efforts to reach a ceasefire have failed so far, and world powers are even fueling the conflict. Evidence suggests the United Arab Emirates is backing the Rapid Support Forces. The militia group is also linked to Russia's notorious Wagner mercenaries. The reason? Sudan is rich in raw materials, and the Rapid Support Forces militias control numerous gold mines in the country. The relationship between the Sudanese government and the United Nations has been tense for months. UN Special Representative to Sudan, Volker Perthes, quit his job after being declared unwelcome by the Sudanese government. Now Sudan has called on the UN to terminate its special mission there immediately. Egelin fears Sudan could sink into total chaos.
An ancient civilization, which is Sudan, has been torn to pieces, really. 24 million people need aid, and we're overstretched, underfunded. Our offices have been looted. We need help, really.
Jennifer Collins presenting a report by Anna Osius. We've just heard how dire the situation is in Sudan. People are desperately fleeing the country in droves. We've heard about how some of them are faring in Chad. Many Sudanese have also fled to Egypt, which is to the north of Sudan. The economic situation in Egypt itself is troubling. Soaring inflation makes it tough for both refugees and citizens to cover basic needs. Tyler Drake and Bianca Carrera sent us this report from Cairo.
On the outskirts of Cairo, nestled at the far end of the affluent 6th of October district, lies a less fortunate neighborhood. Here, in an area called Mesek and Osman, seemingly dominated by remnants of former social housing, hundreds of buildings stand in dire condition, battered by the encroaching desert sands.
The war had a big impact on us. It destroyed our houses, our family, our neighbours. All of them died.
This is Chayma Ibrahim Hassan, a 27-year-old Sudanese woman from the region of Darfur, who now shares one of the tiny apartments on the first floor of one of these buildings with her mother, 3 of her siblings, her son, and one of her sister's 2 small daughters. They all fled to Egypt to escape the brutal civil war that broke out in Sudan in April.
We are back with the latest on the situation in Sudan, which is embroiled in a violent power struggle that has left at least 185 people dead.
Heavy fighting continues for a 4th straight day in the capital, Khartoum.
We tried to go to other states in Sudan, but there was no way. We have small children, my mother, my sisters, my little brother. So we decided to go to Egypt, because even in the other Sudanese states, there is no safety.
When Chayma and her family arrived in Wadi Halfa, a small Sudanese city near the border with Egypt, they faced the first set of problems of their journey. Her young siblings didn't have passports, and her brothers older than 16 were denied entry into the country. This is common at the border, and is one of the main reasons why most Sudanese families in Egypt become single-parent households led by women. According to official figures from the Egyptian government, over 300,000 Sudanese have crossed into Egypt since the war broke out. Chayma's mother, Ikhlas, says they have gained little from registering with the United Nations Refugee Agency, or UNHCR.
It's been 5 or 6 months until now, and there has been no help. A lot of people come from Sudan. Every time I ask the committee, they tell us to be patient, to wait. But we are here, sitting and being patient. These girls here work, and more or less we get to pay the house's rent in the meantime.
Before the conflict, we had a total number of 293,000 registered refugees overall, and among those there were 61,000 Sudanese. When we compare it with, as we speak today, we've seen a 47% increase in the overall refugee numbers.
This is Sebastian Herwig, the Senior External Relations Officer at the UNHCR office in Cairo.
Currently, there are 430,000 refugees registered with us, among whom there are 170,000 Sudanese. So when you only look at the increase of Sudanese, we're talking about a 180% increase, so that is absolutely enormous, and of course driven by the conflict, which hasn't really got better.
Even though this influx is putting extra pressure on the already stretched resources, since the war began, the UNHCR has been working hand in hand with other UN agencies, NGOs, and the Egyptian Red Crescent, with only 45% of the estimated needed funding to address the crisis. Together, they provide essential services, including water, food, hygiene items, medical aid, and transportation to those arriving in dire conditions, before registration at the Cairo or Alexandria offices. After registering, migrants can, at least on paper, benefit from the public services any Egyptian citizen has access to, such as health and education. However, there are other hardships that the provision of these services cannot help with. Chayma says she and her family are being taken advantage of.
We work in the factory, and they do not give us our money. A month is worth 3,000 Egyptian pounds. They give us 1,500. 1,500 from which we eat, we rent. When I go to the store and I want to buy something, like sugar, which is at £30, they sell it to Sudanese at 40. Something that is at 10, they sell to Sudanese at 15.
For Rimaz, Shayma's younger sister, it's also affecting her children's education.
We didn't register our kids at school. They're staying at home. We're scared to bring them to school as that requires money. It's very difficult.
Rimaz says she heard that some Sudanese kids who did go to school had been beaten up by their classmates. Chayma says she wants to leave the country.
We came here and found the situation to be harder than in Sudan. In Sudan, there is war. There are warplanes, death. But the humanitarian war in Egypt is extremely hard. The last decision I took was that I would find any way to get out. I would get out through the sea, get on a boat, and get to Europe. I came to Egypt as a refugee, but I did not find protection. I did not find safety. We would go to any country but Egypt.
Applying for resettlement into a third country is a right every refugee has, according to the UN. However, only less than 1% of registered refugees have been granted relocation. Some are trying to leave by other means, says African policy expert from the NGO Refugees International, Abdullahi Borukhalache.
The majority of Sudanese that you speak to, no, Abdullahi, I just want to go to another country. When they say that, they don't mean within the African countries, they mean outside the African countries, mostly to Europe. That's their primary objective, because Cairo is unbearable. But the problem is UNHCR processing is very difficult. Western countries, especially in Europe, they are tightening their borders. And so what that does is it incentivizes people to seek migration through bad faith actors. Really, people who will not care. They load you on those dinghies. They take all your money and you're just stranded.
Terrible disaster at sea, a fishing boat sinking with hundreds on board, hundreds of migrants missing.
Rescuers are continuing their search off the coast of Greece for victims of a boat that has claimed the lives of at least 79 migrants.
Survivors say the vessel left the Libyan port of Tobruk heading for Italy. It's one of the worst incidents involving migrants in the Mediterranean this year.
Nearly 190,000 irregular migrants have reached southern Europe this year, the highest number since 2015. According to UN data, over 2,500 died along the way. Egypt is also seen as a key actor to managing any flow of migrants out of Gaza in light of the Israel-Hamas war, as it controls its only known Israeli border. But even though the country has rejected accepting a possible inflow of refugees from Gaza, it has accelerated negotiations with the EU. Here's European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen during a recent visit to the Rafah border crossing between Egypt and Gaza.
In addition to our humanitarian support, we're reaching out to our partners in the region to prevent violence from spreading. I had a very good meeting on this with President al-Sisi this morning.
According to experts, Egypt's severe economic crisis makes it unlikely to be able to prevent any further surge in migration to Europe, given its struggles to manage its own 110 million population. However, an economic agreement, in the light of the still under negotiation new EU deals for migration, would be indirectly pushing for El-Sisi's regime to contain migrants and asylum seekers outside the Union's borders, following the controversial multi-billion euro deals the Union already has with other third countries in North Africa, like Libya, Tunisia, and Morocco. Some members of the European Parliament, like Cornelia Ernst from the Left Party, are very skeptical about the externalization of border control.
Migration is a criminal act. Migrants are criminals. This is more or less the idea. If we speak about externalization, we say the refugees should stay in third countries, and what the third countries do with these migrants is not our thing.
Abdullahi Borukhalache from Refugees International shares that concern.
The EU migration policy is really problematic to the extent that EU doesn't care what sort of government or government agencies are out there that are doing egregious human rights violation, as long as the migrants are prevented from crossing over to Europe. The European Union paid a ton of money to the Sudanese border control. That Sudanese border control, at that time, the group was called Janjaweed. That group now has grown into become RSF. That is causing so many people leave their countries in record numbers. Like hundreds of thousands of people are leaving the country. So I think this idea that you make borders impenetrable, you make people getting visas, legal means of coming into your country difficult. There is no empirical evidence that will prevent. People will just look for the most severe roundabout ways of coming to Europe. People are not migrating because they feel like they can. People just migrate as a last resort.
Back in the neighborhood, the community is celebrating a farewell party because a family of 9 members has been approved for resettlement to Germany. However, very few share the same luck. With the Egyptian visa policy remaining unchanged since June, people are amassing at the other side of the border, and conditions have not improved in either Sudan for those who remain or for those who fled and cannot afford a decent life. Some families will have to wait longer for their dreams to come true. Ada, Chayma's niece, still hopes to go back to Sudan.
I want to go back to Sudan. I want to go to school and I want to be a doctor, but I haven't attended school or university yet. I'm 7 years old and I haven't gone to school yet. I want to go back to Sudan.
This was Tyler Drake, along with Bianca Carrera, reporting from Cairo for DW.
There are some migrants who feel their situation is so dire, they try to make it across the Mediterranean Sea in overcrowded and unsafe fishing boats. Just this week, hundreds made it to the Italian island of Lampedusa after they were rescued by Coast Guard patrol vessels. These are the lucky ones. Many drown at sea. The international crew of German rescue ship Humanity 1 is trying to prevent people from dying while making the crossing. The ship belongs to NGO SOS Humanity. Again and again, they've encountered dangerously overloaded boats on the verge of sinking. Reporter Anupam Dip Kanungo was aboard the Humanity 1 for 2 weeks and observed the crew during training and rescue operations. Natalie Muller has that report.
Eagle 2, call for assistance. Call for assistance on vessel. Vessel is in distress. Passengers on board. Approximately 15 to 20 people on board.
The distress call comes into the Humanity 1 not long before sunset on a calm Mediterranean evening. The call is from Eagle 2, a surveillance aircraft from the European Union border agency Frontex. The stranded people are several hours away. Josh, the captain of the rescue ship, decides to head for the location. As darkness falls, the team scours the horizon. They're in a race against time. They don't know how long the migrants have been out at sea or what state their boat is in. It could be dangerously overloaded and on the verge of sinking. Finally, they catch sight of the distressed vessel.
All crew, get ready to rescue. Get ready to rescue.
The crew has just minutes to launch the rescue boats, loaded with safety equipment.
Bravo, ready to be launched, over. Yes, Bravo is ready.
In the dark, the rescue operation will be more difficult, and the sea has become rougher than it was just a few hours ago. Finally, they approach the vessel in distress.
Hello, my name is Rocco. I come from Europe, okay? You are safe now.
Rocco Aiello works as a search and rescue expert with the German NGO SOS Humanity. The team he leads includes doctors, nurses, emergency workers and other helpers who will support the migrants and translate for them. But first, the team passes life jackets to the 15 men being rescued from the small boat.
Bridge, Bravo. Bravo, bridge, go ahead.
It's a challenge to keep the boat stable in the choppy waters so they don't capsize.
The BB is so weak. The same for Tango. Tango, slow down the speed.
The men start to climb up the ladder onto the rescue vessel.
When you are ready, we start to disembark. I'm ready.
Everyone on board is safe and nobody needs urgent medical attention. The rescued men come from several West African countries. They had already spent more than 2 days on the boat. The rescuers give each survivor a number. That makes it easier for the crew to provide for their needs. One of the migrants is from Gambia. He's been given the number 61. DW is using the pseudonym Omar to protect his identity, as SOS Humanity has requested. Omar explains how they made the harsh journey.
For us, we have to take the byway from Mali, Senegal, Algeria, Tunisia, then you cross. Before reaching Tunisia, you suffer a lot. Many people die in the desert. Hundreds of people die in the sea, thousands die in the sea. But the desert only is difficult.
The central Mediterranean is one of the most dangerous migration routes, but thousands risk the journey each year, fleeing violence and hunger or simply searching for a better life. Over the last 10 years, more than 27,000 people have died or disappeared while crossing the water from Africa to Europe. Omar was only 14 when he first decided to risk his life to reach Europe.
One of the reasons was, one, my education. I want to finish my education. And second, things were really hard for me and my family. And I wanted to complete my career as a footballer. And I think that's the best talent I have. But in Africa, you cannot do it because you need to work to have something to eat, to feed your family, to feed yourself, to buy some stuff you need.
The Mediterranean states have divided the sea into search and rescue zones. The ship that's just been rescued was in Malta's zone, which stretches across 250,000 square kilometres. Human rights organisations have accused Malta of ignoring distress calls regarding boats at sea. The rescue call the Humanity responded to came across radio channel 16, says Josh, the vessel's captain.
We don't have information if they issued any other than the Mayday relay on channel 16, but the Mayday relay on channel 16 is open for every ship in the vicinity and also overheard by authorities on land. So Malta should be aware, and of course we also informed Malta as well as Italy about our intentions via email.
Malta didn't respond to Humanity One's email. Some European governments accuse such civilian rescue ships of acting as a pull factor for migration. Basically, they say the NGOs are encouraging people to risk their lives because they know they might be rescued. But SOS Humanity wants to prevent the Mediterranean from becoming a graveyard, and a day later, the crew is preparing for the next rescue.
Ready to go?
Yeah.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Okay, going forward.
Teams head out in small rubber motorboats to do another pickup. An aircraft flies overhead. It's also monitoring the situation. Like the rescue ships operated by various NGOs, volunteer pilots also patrol the central Mediterranean route. They keep records of alleged illegal measures carried out by various national coast guards, including what are called pushbacks, forcing migrants back to the country from which they attempted the crossing. A storm is approaching. The sea starts to get rough. The team has to work fast to rescue the group of people from a small rusty vessel that's filled with tyres. But as soon as they arrive back at Humanity 1, they have to prepare for another nighttime rescue. A small makeshift metal boat is on the verge of sinking and is bobbing about on the rough sea. There are also 2 young children on board. Rocco is leading the rescue. Many of the rest of the crew are volunteers who are spending part of their annual holidays on board to take part in missions. Some have never been on a rescue ship before, but Rocco has trained them hard. The people on the boat scream and shout as their boat struggles on the waves. The team prepares to take the group, including the 2 children, off the sinking vessel. On that stormy night, the crew carries out 2 more rescues. That brings the total number of survivors on board to 199. One woman from the Ivory Coast explains why she embarked on the dangerous journey across the Mediterranean.
I actually wanted to flee to Tunisia and not cross the Mediterranean. But working there and looking after my child at the same time was hard. The nursery I found for my child gave medicine to my child to make her sleep longer. I complained, even to the police, but no one cared. They also beat my child, and that's why I left.
DW is unable to verify the accounts shared by those rescued, but most of them describe similar experiences, including Omar, the young man who dreams of becoming a footballer.
My friends come from Libya. That way you have to jump grias upon grias, barrier upon barrier. So what happened there, you have to run. It's running. Through day, you run for 3 days, sometimes 2 days. Dogs will be following at you. You have to run. If you stop, they will catch you. So if they catch you, there are 2 things involved. If they catch you, they're going to detain you and they will beat you mercilessly before leaving you to get back to Libya.
When asked who beat him and his friends, Omar responds.
Tunisian police beats. They beat mercilessly. They can beat you for 2 hours.
As the shoreline comes into view, the people begin to celebrate their rescue. They clap and sing. But what awaits them here is still unclear. One by one, they disembark in Italy. They have the right to ask for asylum. During the review process, they will be housed in various asylum centres. Omar, who had the number 61 on board the rescue ship, is given the number 40 on arrival. His dream is to one day wear a football jersey with a number of his own. As for Humanity 1, it will soon set out on another mission, to save as many migrants as possible from drowning in the Mediterranean.
Natalie Mahler with that report by Anupam Deb Kanungo. That wraps up today's show. Thanks so much for listening. Jennifer Collins had produced this episode. The studio team was Wiebke Tegtmeier and Gerd Georgi. I'm your host, Sarah Steffen. Bye for now.